Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, the official podcast of the Commerce Next Growth Show. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We are Sans guest on this episode this week, so in addition to the news and what's on our radar screen, we intend to go a bit deeper on a couple of broader topics inspired in no small part, Steve, by one of your latest Substack posts. But tune in next week. We're celebrating our 300th episode with a very special guest. Woo, exactly. Pete Nordstrom.
I'm tired just hearing that.
I know. I'm excited. Pete Nordstrom joins us on the mic to talk about the challenges and opportunities for retailers and the department store sector. First, we'll be covering off the top retail news and retail adjacent stories of the week, including global chaos spinning up thanks to the Iran war. Then we'll get to our deeper dive segment, and then we'll be back with a little more news. We'll be talking about management shakeups, top retailers, bit about news about Walmart investments, and then we'll be talking about what is on our radar screen. So, Steve, as we mentioned, for the people off the top, we're the official podcast, the Commerce Next Growth Show. This was an event that I was well familiar with, and I had attended a few times. I think it was your first time going last June. What were your first impressions of the show?
That's right. Yeah, we got a chance to not only attend some sessions, but on stage a few times. And I really liked it. It's a nice size. Not too big, not too small, and they've got a lot of great content. I'm excited to announce that Kim Gardner, who is the Tractor Supply CMO, and I will be on stage as the opening keynote on day one. Okay. So looking forward to that.
All right, looking forward to doing that, seeing everyone in the Big Apple in June. And by the way, if you're thinking of attending, there's a code, an offer code for you waiting in our show notes. So be sure and check that out. All right, let's get to the news of the week. So up, down, and sideways. The Straits open, the Straits closed. It's Taco Tuesday. It's extended 2 weeks. All of which is, I've been observing, I'm sure, as have you, the global context. I've seen, people hoarding propane in India. I mean, the ramifications of this spinning out, and eventually, I got to think, kind of like COVID, eventually it's going to come home to roost in North America. What are your thoughts on all this?
I'm actually going to avoid really giving any thoughts about that in particular because I think we've talked about it quite a lot. I mean, I think the main thing really is just how much volatility and uncertainty there is in the information. We caveated at the outset of last week's news that the news was breaking, that the Straits of Hormuz was reopening, but then they were very quickly closed again. And then we've now had a week plus of it being very unclear about what the situation is. So I don't really want to do any deep political analysis or make any predictions, but I think the implications for retail, we'll see, right? But just the fact that it's unclear exactly where things are headed and it's constantly shifting, it makes it really difficult for good decision making, and as it tends to create conservatism. So I just find it obviously for all sorts of reasons, I would love this to be resolved quickly. I have no idea whether by the time people are listening to it, we will see that it looks that way, or we will see that we are in whatever it is, week 9 of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, presumably downstream implications for sure. We've talked about all those quite a lot, but it's really just the chaos that it's creating and the uncertain direction, I guess, of things to make decisions if you're running a retailer.
I was listening to an episode on Puck with their top economist, and I guess I would describe it as baffled in some ways, as he started to think about how the market was just exuberant, really. I mean, we see some of the investment banking folks making like record profits, like record numbers. The market's up. How do you tie all this stuff together? Are they seeing something we're not, or are they looking past it? And what do you think its impact is on the retail sector?
Well, it's a little hard to square that circle, really. If you I was just checking, the S&P is up over 25% since the so-called Liberation Day, despite predictions that tariffs would do significant economic damage, despite the war, despite interest rates staying high, despite inflationary pressures, despite historically low consumer sentiment. So it is pretty hard to understand. At one level, you can see, the gains really for quite a while now have been very concentrated in the AI trade. I think there continues to be a lot of expectation that we will see quite a bit of productivity from AI. last week we had announcements from Meta, Microsoft, Nike with big layoffs, not completely tied to AI, but that's what a lot of people are reading into it. But also, and we're now getting into the heart of earnings season, earnings growth has been pretty good. So I think what we have to read into this is either people are crazy and they're misreading what's likely going to be the case in the future. But I think it really gets back to the expectation that the war effects, as well as tariffs, which we talked about, I think, last week or the week before, are still pretty uncertain what that outlook looks like going forward, will be transitory. But I don't know. I don't want to make predictions about the market either, but it is a little bit hard to understand for sure.
Let's talk about retail results. Now, last week we talked about the CNBC NRF numbers, which we surprised to the upside. They were in like the 7%. And generally, we like those numbers because they take a different view in a different way. They're not survey biased like the federal governments are. But the federal governments, the U.S. Census Bureau, put out some numbers, and they were less rosy. What do you make of that?
Yeah, actually, we had two pieces. Another one that was kind of late breaking. So, the Census Bureau came out in the year over year. I won't get into the subcategories, but year over year, core retail was up 4.2%. So, and as you said, we saw 7% in the same time period, but it is a different methodology. But that's a pretty big difference. They're usually quite a bit closer. I don't have a good explanation. As you said, I would tend to think that the CNBC NRF numbers, since it's derived from credit card data and with some corrections or adjustments, would be the most reliable. But we also got Circana, and their data was even less robust. They said there was a 3.3% year over year growth rate. So I don't know. It's a little bit like the stock market. It's a little bit hard to understand. And one of the things that Circana said in their commentary, because they do a little bit more commentary than certainly the Census Bureau does, pretty much just the facts, ma'am. They said they actually think the data for March is a little bit misleading because part of the reasons why the numbers were pretty good is that there was calendar shift because Easter came early, and they also noticed some promotional shifts. So their commentary was, wouldn't assume that this pace is going to continue. And that also related to something we talked about, I think, the last week or two, is that the impact of fuel prices tends to be a bit lagged in terms of what consumers experience as well as what retailers from a transportation and delivery standpoint would experience. So again, I don't know that I have found a time period. I mean, obviously during COVID, there were all sorts of things that are going on that were really hard to figure out, at least in the first few months. But we're now quite a number of years past that. And I've really found this data over the last few months and quarters among the most difficult to really understand and try to connect the dots.
Well, let's put a wrap on this first part of the news. Basically, we don't understand what's happening. I've summarized.
So if you're tuning in for any insight, we will give you double your money back if you're dissatisfied with this analysis.
I imagine there's a lot of folks like us scratching their heads trying to sort these things out. All right. Last week, we talked about the 5th anniversary of your first book, which spawned this podcast, actually. And this week is another anniversary, the 2nd anniversary of your second, Leader's Leap. Any reflections or any thoughts 1 year out from that?
Well, the only reason I wanted to bring it up, other than perhaps the shameless self-promotion, is that some of the points I made in the book, obviously made quite a few points, but a lot of what I was trying to get at was how a lot of leaders are in denial that fundamentally they're not really understanding how much things are changing and how much they need to aim higher in the value they deliver and move faster, particularly in what seems to be an accelerating pace of disruption. I was thinking that when I started writing the book, which was, I guess, just under 3 years ago at this point, Gen AI was just hitting the radar screen, really, and nobody really in our broader circles was talking about agentic. And here we are now that entire conferences are basically focused on that, including Shop Talk, Commerce Next, of course, will be a big topic. It just strikes me that there's still many leaders with their heads in the sand, and I just think that that's likely to end badly. I guess I hope not just by virtue of my book, really. It just was that you'd think more people would just see how their businesses are struggling and how their incremental type of actions aren't moving the dial. And that would cause them to go, wait a minute, which I think we'll get to something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Maybe I need a really different way of approaching things. So I guess that's my biggest reflection. It's really more a disappointment that some of the people that really need to change in a significant way, they haven't been making the leaps they need to.
Let's move on to talk about revisiting something we got into with our friend ourselves, and then with our friend Simeon Siegel several times in the podcast. The whole, is DTC all cracked up to be? And it's funny that we're talking about this today, because yesterday I was on the stage at Google Canada and gave a keynote presentation, a great audience, lots of questions. And one of the questions that came up was, well, as we think about wholesale strategies, does it make sense for companies to still do business in wholesale? Or is there a market for those companies who can go out in DTC? And I met some great people in Vancouver last week, one of which called Jilly Box. They put a box together and they're pure play, no wholesale, and they're making it work. So I said it can work, but we saw with other examples many times it doesn't, and the math doesn't always work out. So let's revisit that for a bit, because we've had some wins and losses. So talk about first of all, talk about the thesis, bring everybody up, and then what have we learned?
Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up is Nike's been in the news quite a lot, including another thing we're going to talk about in a minute. But I also was looking at some of the earnings that have come in. We talked about Levi's, which has pretty successfully been increasing their balance of DTC, but Nike has been criticized for not doing that. This is a much smaller brand, but Moncler, the luxury outerwear company, they just reported their earnings, and part of what's driving their success is their expansion of their DTC strategies. And by the way, I should try to be clear, because I know the nomenclature gets confusing. When I talk about DTC, it's everything but wholesale, right? It's when you're selling direct to consumer, whether that's online or whether that's with your own stores. So I know sometimes not everybody agrees with that definition. But what Simeon was pointing out, I think largely correctly, was that moving into DTC, just because you're going to capture the full gross margin and have the direct relationship with the customer and get to control your experience, isn't a slam dunk. And that's largely because the economics are very different. And I don't want to totally try to give his whole argument, but some of that is, you don't eliminate the middleman automatically. You become the middleman, because now you're responsible for getting the product to the consumer, whether that's in an e-commerce type transaction, or as many of these brands have, very expensive real estate for their own stores. So it's a trade-off. And I think definitely in the case of Nike, which again, we'll come back to a little bit more in a second, they really overshot the runway there. So that was something in Nike's case that was supposed to be this big unlock for them when they first announced it. And in the first few years of that did not play out. And there are a bunch of reasons for that aren't just about getting DTC wrong. But the contrary example is plenty of successful vendors have shifted their balance. So I think what we really have learned is, yes, a lot of the newer disruptor models really got a lot of things wrong. They basically ignored physical retail, whether that was their own stores or wholesale. As we've talked about, Allbirds and some others, Glossier, that have really pulled back on their own stores. So I think those are really more specific to brands that didn't have a big enough value proposition to work or made some investment mistakes. But we can find plenty of newer brands on running, Yeti, Vuori, quite a few others that realize the value of wholesale in reaching customers and building a brand combined with their own direct-to-consumer strategy. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model. We can clearly find some examples of people, like you mentioned, that are able to grow without a big investment in wholesale and maybe not any investment in their own stores. So I just think there's more nuance to it. But it's certainly the case that wholesale is not going away. For the most part, though, it is contracting, which is exactly the reason why Levi's has developed more of their direct-to-consumer strategy. It's exactly the reason why so many luxury brands in particular have invested heavily in e-commerce and opened their own stores. So I think it's just, there's still a lot of confusion about it. And I think it really is very, very particular to your competitive set and what channels are available to you.
All right, Leon, let's get to a third thing. And I wanted to talk about one of your Substack Pardon the Disruption posts. And a couple of things, it prompted me because I was in Vancouver last week. You mentioned in this post, Shut Up and Play the Hits. One of the things you mentioned was how, typical charities would go after another fund drive, another fundraising drive and stay with what's worked. And I was in Vancouver last week. I was sharing with you off mic at probably one of the most innovative food banks I've ever been at. And one of the things that the president said to me, he says, when I got there, the first thing I did is stopped community donations of product. And of course, I was taken back. And he said, no, we were spending $50,000 a year just to get rid of the garbage that was given to us in all these well-meaning contributions. And he's really just turned the model on its head in a bunch of different ways. And then, at the same time, I was also thinking about QVC. So QVC declared, went into protection, went bankruptcy. As you and certainly you and the listeners might know, I worked for 7 years in the Canadian equivalent of QVC. Wasn't owned by QVC, but the same model, the shopping channel. So, Of course, that got me thinking about, that was a very, very successful model for many, many, many years, but still they got themselves into trouble. So let's talk about it. I mean, what is it that the point you're trying to make? And I guess it's that point at which what's been working before may or may not work for us in the future, and how you kind of reorient your way thinking around that, right?
Yeah, I've actually used this example a bit in the past, so people may know this from one of my books. But for clarity, the cultural reference point, which is a little bit of a deep dive here, is there's a 2012 documentary about LCD Sound System's turns out wasn't their final conference, and their frontman James Murphy was doing kind of an extended stage patter. And Win Butler, who some people will know is a member of Arcade Fire, just yelled out to him, "Shut up and play the hits." And that ended up becoming the title of the documentary. But, it made me think about how, whether it is the charity, whether it is, any comedians doing a performance, going to see the Eagles at the Sphere, whatever, like a lot of people are going there to hear the thing that has worked for them in the past. Now, in the business context, one of the examples I use is the Bed Bath & Beyond 20% coupon, which they used really to the point of destruction. It's not the only thing that went wrong at Bed Bath & Beyond, but you could make the argument that it worked until it didn't, right? And we see this all the time where people go back to the same tried and true techniques, but when the customer is changing a lot, when the competition is changing a lot, when technology is changing a lot, what got you here isn't necessarily going to get you to where you need to go. So as much as I've talked about fear getting in the way of people taking the leaps they should, in this particular case, I was really trying to point more towards the failure of imagination, that if you don't really see that your model is approaching its expiration date, then your tendency is just to keep iterating on that same model. So your QVC example is a great one, right? But if the world is moving from Blockbuster to Netflix, or we can probably come up with all sorts of analogies, you just keep staying invested in this thing that's running out of gas. So I do think, number one, you have to realize when that's happening, and then you have to have the imagination to try to envision something different. So I try to get a little bit cute towards the end using the analogy, probably overplaying the analogy, which is the real test isn't whether your current hits are still drawing a crowd. It's whether you're writing the songs that will matter in 5 years, right? So you can get a little bit misled by having still a decent business that seems to have some resonance, but you've got to really be looking ahead. I got actually several really very nice emails from people, including a couple CEOs, who said that they had shared the post with their management team, because even though one of the, well, actually both of the companies are growing quite nicely. It's not that they're in trouble, but both
Right.
folks more or less said they worry that they're going to become complacent, and because they are getting some good traction, that they're not going to see the iceberg that might be on the horizon. That's a real mixed metaphor there, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember, speaking of Leaders Leap, I remember when we launched that at SMU together to an audience, someone in the audience basically asked a version of the same question. It's like, we're doing well, but I think, that may not last, but I can't convince everyone at the top above me or my colleagues that we need to be thinking differently. And of course you said, well, buy 50 copies of my book and just give them to everybody. And that'll be very helpful.
It's a possible answer that you can get for $19.95.
And it also, thinking all the way back, we're at 300 episodes next week, thinking all the way back to the genesis of this. And in some of the early days, we talked about your roles at Sears, where you're trying to effectively do a similar thing, right? Things were, big retailer things. What could go wrong? Well, maybe the future could go wrong, but it's risky to change course. So I do think it is a very, very central, strategy discussion at retailers and other businesses. So anyway, if anybody's not subscribed, be sure and subscribe. That many other posts, and anyway, it was "Shut Up and Play the Hits," which was a great post. So great discussion. Thanks. We'll be back with more retail news and what's on our radar screen to wrap up right after these messages. The biggest names in retail don't guess. They use Placer AI. Placer's location intelligence platform turns foot traffic into real strategy, giving you near real-time insights into market share, cross-shopping trends, and trade areas for any location in America. Whether you're entering a new market, tracking a competitor, or optimizing your existing footprint, Placer gives you the data to decide with confidence. Visit placer.ai to see it in action. Today's episode is presented by Find Mine. Outfits, vibe, and trends are what your consumers eat up on social media. Are you capitalizing on them? Or do your experiences feel static or take too many hours to build and maintain? Listen to this. Find Mine delivers on-brand inspiration to over 100 million consumers every month. Lululemon and Ann Taylor use Find Mine's content engine to turn their catalogs into complete looks, better visual similar swaps, and on-trend programmatic ads, improving LTV, CAC faster than any other activation. Now, you can get live fast in as little as 1 week without enterprise contracts or waiting on a product backlog. Check them out at findmine.com. All right, let's get back. Let's finish off the news of the week and what's on our radar screen. Let's start off with Walmart. They are making some significant investments in stores, so there's no question they are big believers, and I think follows right into just the discussion we just had. Things are going great for Walmart, but let's make sure they keep going great. Talk about what your thoughts are on their investments.
Well, it's interesting, not that this is a new idea, but one of the things I've been saying for years, it's really about the hybridization and harmonization of retail between physical and digital. And we talked several weeks ago, I guess now it's about a couple months ago, when Walmart reported their earnings and sales through their physical stores are actually not growing. Yet they are investing big time in their stores. Clearly, they are making an unambiguous bet on physical retail. They are remodeling more than 650 supercenters and neighborhood markets. That's a pretty significant percentage of their stores and quite a lot of money. And they're continuing to open new stores. And you'd think at this point, with however many stores Walmart has, there aren't that many opportunities for new stores. But I think they understand how critical physical stores are to driving the whole ecosystem. So whether they're actually going to see an acceleration from where they've been with what's rung up in a brick and mortar store, it's very clear that physical stores are really the hub of the brand. They drive the digital business. They allow for buy online, pick up in store, ship from store. So I think it's really, not that this is new, it's really a lot more clarity around how the role of physical stores have changed. And when you do it right, and when you keep them fresh, and when you do a lot of other things right, obviously, you can really drive the business. So we'll hear from Walmart on their earnings in about a month, I guess. And I expect they will be nicely above the average for their competition.
Last in the news, let's talk about some big name management shakeups. I guess one of them is a kind of a shakeup in slow motion, and that's Lululemon. I mean, Calvin McDonald left Lululemon several months ago, and there was not a named successor, and now they have named a new president. My first thought was WWCW. What would Chip Wilson think? Well, what do you think about Heidi O'Neill in the role at Lululemon? She came from Nike. You would know a few things about Nike. What are your early thoughts?
Well, I will admit right off the bat that I might be a tiny bit biased because Heidi O'Neill was the first person to hire me to do a paid speech. I kicked off, I think I can say this now, I kicked off the direct-to-consumer initiative 9 years ago or something. So she was a fan of my old blog at that time, and she called me up and said, "Hey, do you do any speaking?" And I was like, "Yes, I do," even though I hadn't done much. Certainly had not gotten paid much for it. I guess I got some free trips or something like that, but this was like, actual cash. And, it was a check or transfer probably. But anyway, so I think she's a terrific leader. I will say, and I'll get to some of the very mixed to negative feelings about her appointment, not from me, but from Wall Street. She has an incredible track record, 25 years at Nike. Before that, she was at Levi Strauss in marketing, but she moved up at Nike from marketing roles, more category management product roles, eventually to run the entire global women's business. So she's got great international experience and across all the different categories that they're in. Then, as I mentioned, she was promoted to kick off the consumer offense initiative, so all the direct to consumer. Then she picked up broader product, broader marketplaces. So I think effectively from an operating standpoint, she was the number 2 executive at Nike with a very diverse experience. Now, the mixed negative reaction from the street, I think, is, as we've talked about several times, including pretty recently, Nike's had a difficult time of it the last several years. And I would say when people look at Lululemon's issues, lack of innovation, being over assorted, mixed success in terms of getting their distribution right, challenges globally, blah, 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 pretty similar to what's happened at Nike. And to the extent that Heidi's been there for a long time, perhaps the take is, well, she wasn't able to do that in the last few years at Nike. Why should she be able to do this at Lululemon? So, I think, and she has not been a CEO, though the business that she was responsible for at Nike, considerably bigger than Lululemon and continually, much more global as well. So, but, she hasn't run a publicly traded company. So, I think those are legitimate concerns. People are also sniping a little bit at she's not going to start for 5 months, which I think is kind of weird. I don't know if there's a particular reason for that, but they have interim management. Calvin McDonald's been out of that role for several months now. So I think obviously investors are like, well, we need to get the permanent person in there ASAP, and that's not happening. But we'll see, obviously, but she certainly has the talent and experience. And I think she's a very impressive leader. So I think she certainly has the ability to be successful there. Whether she's the right person, given all of Lululemon's challenges, obviously time will tell.
Now let's move our thoughts to Best Buy. So a change of management as well at Best Buy. And of course, this one is so more of a rollover, so to speak. Talk about the change with Corey Barry out at Best Buy.
Yeah, so Corey Barry got a lot of attention. She was over the years, she got a lot of attention partially because she was she was the first female CEO at Best Buy, but also one of the relatively few female CEOs in retail. And I think she got off to a pretty fast start. But if you look at the facts, they're not so great for her tenure. Revenue at Best Buy since she got the CEO job in 2019 is lower today. The stock has not performed well. In fact, it's quite a bit worse than the average. I think it's down like 45% or something in the last year or so. And I don't think Best Buy has they've really treaded water in terms of their performance. Now, some of that is there hasn't been the next hardware cycle and some of the buy forward stuff we've talked about a bunch. But nevertheless, the performance hasn't been there. And I think it's a fair comment to say there hasn't been a clear answer to what you could very much argue is an existential threat from Amazon. They have hung in there better than I think a lot of people, myself included, would have guessed, say, 10 years ago. But the performance hasn't been there. Now, the official line is this is a planned transition. She's being replaced by one of her direct reports, that she is retiring. I will point out she's 51. So that seems like a little bit of a retirement.
But 7 years in the role.
Technical thing. Maybe that's the right technical thing given her tenure. So anyway, some real changes. So in terms of female retail CEOs, one woman enters, another one leaves.
All right, let's wrap up with what's on our respective radar screens. You go first.
Well, I would say in general, I'm really, really interested in what we're going to see from some of the big players with their earnings in light of all the things we talked about towards the top of the show. Maybe not so much their actual results, because we would not have seen the full impact from the war, but really what they say about the future. But coming up this week, we get Amazon's earnings, and that's always interesting because of all sorts of nuances they talk about. But I would say I would be very keenly looking at what they think about fulfillment costs, because as an e-commerce only player, their fulfillment costs are higher than the average retailer, so they're quite sensitive to that. And they also have been making a big deal about not growing their employee base despite sales that are growing quickly, and of course the ad business. So I think there's a lot there. I guess the other thing we talked about last week or the week before from Andy Jassy's letter is the revelation that they are apparently now the number 2 grocer in the United States. So now that they've got several more weeks and a little probably clearer idea of their trends, I'm interested to see what they say about the grocery business in particular.
For me, I want to talk about surveillance pricing. Now, this is based on the idea that retailers, airlines, hotels, whoever, would take all the data that they have about you as an individual, compare that to all the data that they have about me as an individual, basically, and give us 2 different prices. Maybe they think you're more affluent than I am. Maybe they think I'm more desperate than you are, or whatever. So it's another deep, deep layer of price variance. Now, the FTC opened up a surveillance pricing inquiry in 24, and they were talking to firms, everybody from MasterCard, Bloomreach, who had this data, Accenture, McKinsey. And they did this, our third-party intermediaries using AI and algorithms, consumer data, what they know about us to vary prices, which many people it strikes as slightly unfair. I mean, it's not unusual for you and I to get a different offer at a loyalty offer. Maybe you buy more chicken than me and they want me to buy chicken. Here, buy some more chicken with a loyalty offer. So anyway, the FTC kind of didn't, their results were they said, well, it's clear that you all have this data. It's not clear that we're using it against consumers. Now, bring that back to Instacart. So in December 25, this flared up where 400, who was it? Consumer Reports did some work. 437 shoppers found that many identical grocery items were priced differently with differences 23 to 24%. So now Instacart said that wasn't surveillance pricing. That was something else. That was just experiment. But okay. We'll not do price testing anymore. So anyway, I think with AI, and as people think about AI, clearly the politicians think this is something to grab onto, with affordability being key. There's kind of a feeling of, at this level, is this fair or is this not, that people would get different prices again. I don't know. I haven't heard retailers doing this to this extent. I mean, it's not, you hear rumors that, if you and I went to logged into an airline, you and I would get different prices. Have you heard of any retailers or any industries doing this that would? Oh yeah, that we should. Yeah, no,
well, I'm aware. I mean, I tend to refer to it as dynamic pricing, but I'm aware of quite a lot of tests that have been done over the years, including some I may have participated in. I mean, I do think that one of the things, at the risk of stating the obvious, that is true is that first of all, technology has gotten much better. So the ability, even before AI, the ability to do this is infinitely greater. Both, I mean, by when I say better, it's both more precise, but also lower cost to execute. You could certainly make the argument, not that it's only e-commerce, but the more that e-commerce grows, the greater percentage opportunity you have to do this more effectively. I think it does get down to some philosophical arguments as well as some strategic arguments. For a long time, and I'm sure you lived through this, there were different prices, and there still are sometimes different prices online from the store. My point of view, when I had a say in this at two different retailers, was that the prices should be the same in either channel.
As with mine.
But you can make an argument for why that doesn't make sense. Just in general, it's not on a micro segment or individual basis. So I don't know. I mean, I think that you could absolutely make an argument that if you say, well, we're lowering prices for people that have an affordability challenge, that is a benefit to the consumer. If you are broadly optimizing it for whatever set of reasons, I think that's not a great look. And you could definitely argue that that is not equitable, and there would be reason for that to be regulated. But I think it does seem overall that the industry has not gotten very aggressive about it when they absolutely could if they wanted to. So whether that's good self-regulation or they've just convinced themselves that they're going to get sued or they're going to get a really negative story in the news or whatever, I'm not so sure.
Or it's how they treat their customers, that they treat their customers equally and make them different offers. Of course, it varies by region as well. It costs more to get something out to Washington.
That's important to say. I mean, there are other reasons where, if you're an inner city store, I mean, you see this in convenience stores all the time. I mean, it's not done dynamically. It's done just, we're in an expensive real estate. And so the Gatorade that you buy in one 7-Eleven is 20% more expensive in Manhattan than it is in Davenport, Iowa. But that's a cost to serve kind of argument. And I think it's also the case that the competitive set would have similar relative dynamics. It's not targeting specific groups or specific consumers. So I think that's a different kind of argument, but that definitely goes on. It's just not dynamic.
I guess what they don't want to see is if you and I walk into the same convenience store and they detect that you're fabulously wealthy and I'm less wealthy, then you would pay more for your Gatorade.
We know
whether there's integrity in that data, whether there's integrity in that data or not. It also reminds me. Remember when Coke did this in the Coke tried doing it according to temperature in some of their automatic vending machines, and the price went up the hotter it got, and they just got vilified for that, rightly so. Anyway, so that's on my radar screen, and I think it's a really interesting issue, and I think it's going to be a big topic with AI, right? Just superpowering what is thinking around how to optimize relationships with customers and optimize pricing. All right, that's a wrap on this episode of the show.
Thanks for tuning in. To help more retail leaders discover the industry's leading podcast, please drop us that 5-star rating and review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy your pods. And for more on my strategic advisory services, keynote speaking, best-selling books, and even more retail industry insights, go to StephenPDennis.com.
If you are a brand or service provider looking to take your influence to the next level, reach out to us for sponsorship, advertising, or event partnerships. And if you want to learn more about my own keynote speaking and advisory practice, reach out to me via LinkedIn.